So to begin with, we've got our scrolling information on this one-page scroller right here. So I'm going to point you to the Finder, and in the Finder you'll see our finished project here, as well as our progress files. And you'll notice we had our first three that we were focusing in on, and now that we've focused in on most of the basics, I want to just jump ahead and show you this particular example. Now there are two things in here. There's the finished files and the progress files. Now within the progress files you're going to see a little folder here called Archive, which has a very rough scan of a rough sketch, as you can see here. Now, as I tell all my students, and I will encourage you to do so as well, always sort of create a little bit of a paper prototype for yourself. It helps you to organize your thoughts. It helps you to see how you want things to work and what's going to be happening inside this particular example. Now, especially if you go to the Trevor Davis page that I had pointed you to in the previous video, you'll see a much more simplified, extremely simple version of a one-page scroller. But I'm trying to add a couple of things, again, that have been requested of me, so I'm passing them on to you. So here is the one-page scroller sort of in a rough version and what it actually does. You'll notice that I'm using a content tag to just sort of hold the site together. But within that, we have a number of nested tags. Now, one of them is, I'm using the header tag because we're working in HTML5 and we now can use a header tag. And within that header, there actually happens to be a custom class called scroll item. Now, why is it a class? Because you'll notice that in each of the sections that we'll be creating, we want scroll item to act in the exact same way. So, why are we doing this? Well, part of what I wanted to explain to you earlier and what I actually illustrated earlier was the fact that each of the sections that we're scrolling through with our navigation happens to have a different colored background or a different pattern background. Now, in our purpose, it's a very subtle change, but if you wanted to, you could use this to implement, different backgrounds for each of the sections that are much more elaborate, perhaps working with background images or any other type of thing that you want to deal with. Just be aware, though, that I'm working with very small tiling graphics, and they're not really going to add a lot of weight to this particular page. And you should always be conscious of how heavy your page is going to be, especially when you're sticking all of your website into a one-page slider, as we're doing right here. So each of the sections have been given this scroll item class, and that enables it to have its own individual background, as you'll see, because we're also going to put an ID in there, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. Now, within each of those scroll item sections, we're also going to include an article tag, and that article tag, if you remember from HTML5, is going to be set to a fixed pixel amount, and this one we're working with a 960 pixel, and it's going to be centered. So what does that actually mean? That means if I wanted to, I could resize this entire website on a larger browser. As you'll notice, the scroll item area here is going to be set to 100%. And why 100%? So that this background can actually take up the entire screen that we'll be using. Meanwhile, the article is going to be centered within that screen, and it too can have a background if you wanted to. You could sort of layer in multiple backgrounds on top of these things. It's not a problem. However, I'm not doing that. I'm sticking with a very simple little scenario, but I'm sort of, indicating that there are other possibilities here for you to work with if you wanted to expand upon this. And the navigation, as we saw when we were looking at our example, is going to be fixed. You see, as I'm scrolling this area, the navigation is not going to scroll at all. And right there, that's a pretty neat trick that should be a lot of fun for you to work with as well. Now, also, if we take a look at this, sorry, let me get back to where we were originally. Now, also, what you'll notice is that within the centered 960 area, in the first instance, we'll see the nav and the main scroller. But in the second scroll item area and the third, and so on and so forth, you'll notice that there is only one div going to be in this area, and we're going to give it a little .main class. As you can see here, .main, and it's a class so that we can use it multiple times on this page. The main area will scroll. The nav area will be fixed, and unless you want to have something underneath your nav, I've left this area blank. So that just goes to show you the different sort of structure that we have in mind. So now that we've seen it down on paper, let's go to our Finder, and you'll notice I am working here in the progress files. You can take a look at the finish files and jump right into it. That's not a problem. But I've sort of scaled down a couple of things in the progress files, and if you open up the index page, you'll notice that yes, there happens to be, CSS information here, and there's also fonts, and I'm using a really nice font called Lee Gothic in this example. And there are images, and the images, I'm going to trim this and get rid of the other ones, but really all I'm working with are these little simple patterns here. There are 5 of them if you want to experiment with 5 different ones, but after a little bit of tweaking, I actually just decided that I'd be using maybe 3 of these, and I'll explain why, and you'll see. But again, like I said, you can have multiple backgrounds, and that's all something that you could add in here. And all I'm really using is this little logo. I'm trimming away some of the other files in just a second. So there also happens to be the JavaScript files that are necessary to make this work. So what you're going to see is I've already provided you with a particular jQuery file. There is the scroll.to file. That's the original Flesler file that I mentioned to you. But in order to make that look a little bit nicer, we actually have 2 files here. Well, there's the minimized file, which is a little difficult to read because it's all sort of squished up together. But the original work that is not minimized is also here for you to explore. And we'll take a look at that one as well in due time. But in the meantime, however, let's just jump on over to your editor. So if you haven't already opened up your index page, let's go to your editor and take a look at that progress index page. So you'll see that there's a couple of things that are happening here first and foremost. If I were to preview this in the browser, it's kind of ugly looking. It's just blah, plain text like this. It doesn't really look like all that much. Here, I'll give you a live view, and you'll see that the navigation elements are there, but they are still in their list items, and they still look like list items, I should say. But as you can see, I've taken out some of the text in this particular example, the progress file. I've added it in the final version, so you can add it as well or put in your own text. It doesn't really matter. But here I'm just using section 1, 2, 3, and 5, and there is a footer in there as well. You can use it if you wish, or you can remove it. It's completely up to you. But I did keep this top section here so that you could sort of see what it looks like and how it works. So let's look at the code a little bit closer. Now, one thing you will notice is that I just used a HTML comment to comment out the CSS and to comment out the script tags that I'm using in here, which will make the jQuery work. But other than that, it's a HTML5 document, as you can see in the doc type, the meta tag, and it's also got our very simple little HTML5 shim script, if you remember, and that's something that's going to make this all work for us. But let's look at the basic content, and we'll do just that in the next video.